So when you arrive at Fabrica, you'll be very struck by this massive material in front of you. The whole building is filled with this work. It's comprised of approximately 3,000 saplings and thinnings, and I think there might still be a little bit of a smell of the woodland. But then the real experience is to enter the work. This spring we're going to be presenting Olafur Eliasson's amazing artwork, The Forked Forest Path. It's a co-presentation with Brighton Festival 2021 and The Living Coast, which is Brighton and Hove and Lewis Downs Biosphere Partnership. So one of the conditions of being able to present the work is that the materials that are used have got to be sourced sustainably and locally. We began this process of making the work about 18 months, maybe 2 years previously, making contacts with local woods who would be able to supply wood in sufficient quantities.
This section of the wood is part of quite historic ancient woodland, indicated by the bluebells and things that grow along here. We took over the stewardship of this wood about 15 years ago, or even earlier, probably 20 years ago. We've got all this brash that will be very useful for the forest. So we'll be able to take this out and bundle it up and use it for part of the installation. I know the installation by Olafur Eliasson from the Town Gallery, seen it in situ, so I had a very clear idea of what was wanted, and I knew we'd be able to supply the very thin stems really that are needed to create that illusion of a thicket. So the process for that is to go through, mark everything that you feel would work, but to do that in accordance with the management practice that we apply to this wood. So that is not to take down large trees, it's to try and repurpose anything that has already fallen, that's on the ground, and to thin where possible to enable the taller trees to grow. So that's why we're selecting mainly birch, because that is what we use to thin out so that the other trees can grow up more successfully.
The woodlands of the Weald in particular here in the southeast of England have for centuries been managed, so they've always had some human intervention going back hundreds of years, for the time of the Romans even, who made charcoal from the iron in the soil and from the trees which grew around here. Medieval ironworks were very active in managing woodlands. This tradition created the habitat that we've got today, the coppice woodlands, the intervention which releases light into the woodland floor has created a rather special woodland ecosystem. So over centuries we've seen this cycle, this adaptation of a semi-natural woodland into quite a valuable habitat for butterflies, other insects and birds, as well as the orchids and other wildflowers which thrive under this system. So by coppicing, thinning, we're keeping the light coming into the woodland floor and maintaining that ecosystem. The project with Fabrica is a fantastic opportunity to use the tops of the trees, which would normally be wasted. We'd leave them to rot in the forest floor. So we're excited to find the use for the tops of the birch trees in particular. And the birch and the ash, which will be taken from here, will be bundled up in 3-metre lengths and installed in the gallery when the exhibition opens.
I've been thinking for a number of years that it might be really great to show this piece at Fabrica. I was also aware that it had been shown only a few times, and each of those times it had been shown in a white-walled art space. So the relationship between the materials and the space was very, very different from how it's shown here. There's a lot of wood in the building, so there's a very different relationship between the rawness of this material and the kind of finished, varnished, aged feel of a lot of the building. It's interesting to be reminded actually that it's wood in two different forms, and this is where it all starts. I think there's also something very interesting about Fabrica having been a church and the relationships between church architecture and woods, particularly ancient forests, which often feel like a cathedral when you walk into them. There's a circular aspect to the creation and the deinstallation of this project. So the important thing is that these trees haven't been grown specifically for this installation. And at the end of the exhibition, all the trees will be mulched, and then they'll go to Stanmer Woods, where they'll be put under new trees, which are growing now. One of the things about the forked forest path that's common to all of Eliasson's other works is the active participation. You have to interact with this work, you have to take the journey in order to get the experience that he's offering. So there's a pathway cut through this thicket, if you like, and on your journey you'll be asked to make a choice about which pathway you'll take to continue it. One of the things that's interesting about showing the forked forest path now is we're just over a year into the coronavirus pandemic, and over the past year lots of us have spent more time in nature. Some of that time's been in Woodland, but I think we've all become a little bit more attentive. This increased sensitivity to the natural world perhaps gives us at Fabrica an opportunity to explore a little bit more our relationship with woods and woodland, because it's a very ancient relationship. Those relationships are to do with our folklore, our fairy tales, but also our health and well-being. And really importantly, there's the ecological aspect of this. I know it's important to Olafur Eliasson, and it's a big part of many of his works, but it's also really important to Fabrica. We've been bringing ecological questions and issues into our programming here since 2014. And this comes at a time when the Woodland Trust has just released a report which raises all sorts of questions about what kind of threat our woodland is under. And in a way, what we're trying to do is to use the exhibition as a portal for people to find out much more about woods, to visit woods, to experience woods, to love woods, and to value them.